We have gotten word that 7 states have seceded from the United States. These states are South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas. Although the original motive is unclear, and many are arguing that there are many reasons why this happened, what actually set off the Civil War is the most recent presidential election in which Abraham Lincoln won. Despite not being on 9 ballots of the states, he won with 40% of the popular vote and with 180 electoral votes. With this major win for the North, the South has felt that their way of life has been greatly threatened. Here we have our news correspondent addressing the first event that led up to this. We're here today remembering the war that took place 14 years ago that decimated Mexico and reintroduced the controversial topic of slavery into politics, known as the Mexican-American War. Although blamed on Mexico for starting the war over a border dispute in Texas, where they relied on the Rio Grande, or a river 200 miles north, it has a stronger sense as it was an underlying cause for the Civil War. As the U.S. won the war, and the Guadalupe Hidalgo Treaty is signed in 1848, they gained a large section of what is now known as the continental U.S., including California, the Utah Territory, and the New Mexico Territory. Previously, the Compromise of 1840 was signed, which dictated that any state below the Mason-Dixon line would be considered a slave state. This could not happen, and it was already an established region with inhabitants, which only put further tension between the now widening both sides and causing the creation of the Confederate States. We now head to our analyst for the further story. To deal with this problem with the splitting of California, the Compromise of 1850 is made to fix it and decide if slavery will be legal in territories gained from Mexico. The compromise listed that California would be a free state, while both the Utah and New Mexico Territory would be decided by popular sovereignty. This decision angered those who opposed slavery, as it gave the South another chance to implement slavery in new territories. The unfortunate aspect of this was that the compromise added the fugitive state law, which added that citizens must help in the capture and return of escaped slaves in the North. Ultimately, this led to free blacks being kidnapped and sent to the South for cash reward. The compromise, written by Democrats, led to an even more bitter relationship between the North and the South. Here we go to our chief responder for the rest of the story. In 1852, Harry Beecher Stowe wrote the second most best-selling book in the 19th century, known as Uncle Tom's Cabin. In it, she depicted how terrible slaves were treated and the horrible living conditions that they faced in great detail. Although many think this is just a book, it was more than that, as it angered Southerners, as Stowe wrote very negatively about slave owners, only adding fire to an uprising of abolitionists. Additionally, this is not the largest reason why the Civil War, only a small part of it actually, as Uncle Tom's Cabin only added more salt to the open wound of the North and the South, both having very different ideas. Here we have our investigative reporter with the continuation of this breaking news. We're here today following the continuation of the breaking news with the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which occurred in 1854. Although both territories had a high enough population to apply for statehood, the question came up again on whether slavery should be allowed in these new states. Although the Missouri Compromise was already in place that would mandate that these two states would be free due to being north of the line, it was unofficially repealed and popular sovereignty is applied. This decision outraged those who opposed slavery, as it gave slave owners another chance to get a slave state. So many rushed into the border to Kansas to stop the Missouri slave owners from going into the two new states and threatening citizens into voting. This was ultimately known as Bleeding Kansas, which left 56 dead. This is a major event, as it was one of the larger scale events where blood was spilled pre-Civil War. Yet not the event that set off the Civil War entirely. The Dred Scott decision was the most controversial decision made during this era. This decision ultimately made slaves as property and not people, therefore having no rights. Additionally, as they were property, they could legally be in any territory that the owner wanted them to be in. This outraged abolitionists and made slave owners extremely happy, as this theoretically could allow every state to be a slave state. This had intentions even more between both sides, especially after this decision was made by the Supreme Court. Lastly, John Brown's raid was the last event before the election that set off the Civil War. This failed raid, lasting only 2 days, was organized by John Brown, which involved him raiding a southern armory and going from plantation to plantation, freeing all the slaves. Unfortunately, he never got that far, as he was surrounded in the armory, causing him to surrender. A few days later, he was tried and convicted of treason and hanged. Although he was executed, his image lived beyond the grave, as he became a martyr for abolitionists across the country. Although many argue on what the true reason was, all the said reasons led up to and made the election of 1860 act as a tipping point due to heightened tensions between both sides, making the Civil War unbearable. Thank you for tuning in this special report on breaking news, and we'll see you next time.